welcome back to Making It. My name is Mirabelle, and I'm the creator and host of this podcast. Today's episode features a conversation with Cait Nishimura. She's a Japanese-Canadian composer whose works are frequently performed at many music education conferences and festivals, both nationally within Canada and it's just really all over the world. We've never actually met in person, however, we are both alumni from the University of Toronto. I even performed her music in the U of T Wind Ensemble while I was there, and we have a bunch of mutual friends. So her name just kept showing up for me everywhere, and that got me really curious about her and her work. Cait walks us through her whole creative process, but also the more admin side of things where she has to communicate with band directors or the people who are commissioning her for work. All of this actually led to her burning out, and so she talks a bit about that, what it's like to have to keep pushing through sometimes, and how she's only now slowly recovering, how nature, forest therapy, being a forest guide actually kind of ties everything together. So listen for that. I thought that was very insightful. If you happen to be part of this music education world or concert band, music student life kind of thing, I would love to know if you've ever played Cait's music, because honestly, I think she's one of the only composers who I've actually had the opportunity to at least be able to put a face to the name and play their music and know kind of where the inspirations come from. So it's very cool, and I'm just curious about that if you've had that same experience. I know this introduction is becoming pretty long, but I just wanted to add one more note that I just am really grateful for all the work that Cait is putting into this career of hers, because not just for herself, but she's also representing the women BIPOC composers or, musicians community. And honestly, I'm just really proud of that. So let me know what you think about this episode. Check out Cait's music and her podcast in the links below. Rate and review the podcast, this one. Sorry, I'm saying podcast a lot. Wherever you're listening, or leave a comment if you're watching this on YouTube, and I hope you enjoy. Hi, welcome to the podcast. Welcome to Making It.
Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, as we were just saying, we've never met, but also it feels like we have because of our online presence and our mutual friends and everything. So
yeah, it's a small world.
It is really small. I'm really excited. Because I remember I played your piece in Wind Ensemble when I was at U of T, and I didn't know who you were at the time.
Yeah.
And then I'm in Keenan Granis's Discord server, and then I saw you join that, and then you gave your little introduction. I'm like, wait, that's
Hang
you.
on a second.
I know you, kind of.
Yeah. It was Lake Superior Suite that you played, right? Yeah.
Yeah, that was really
That's
fun.
awesome.
I love your music.
that was such a good experience getting to work with the U of T group on that piece. It's such a special piece to me, so it's really cool that you were involved in that.
Yeah, it's your music has a lot of nature influences, right?
It does, yes.
Yeah. Can you actually just give a little brief history of how you got to where you are now, what you're doing now?
Yeah, sure. So what I'm doing now is I'm a full-time composer. I publish all my own music. And primarily, I write music for wind ensemble or concert band, symphonic band, whichever name you want, but big group of band instruments. That's my favorite ensemble to write for. I've been playing in concert bands myself since I was 11 or 12. And my background actually is not in composition, it's in music education. So I also studied at the University of Toronto. But I studied music education, and I had it in my mind for a long time that being a band director, being a music educator was the thing that I was going to do. And I always wanted to be a composer. I started writing music when I was a kid, but I never really imagined that was something financially feasible as a career. I hadn't seen very many examples, if any, of composers with names like mine who looked like me, who were writing music for wind ensemble. I started playing in bands when I was in elementary school. All through elementary school, high school, university, I didn't play much music written by women, especially people of color. So I think, yeah, it took a little bit of mental gymnastics to kind of wrap my head around the idea that maybe I could actually just be a composer because I wanted to, and that I could change course, even though I had in my mind that I was going to do one thing. So it's, you asked for a brief summary. It's kind of a long story. But I mean, going further back, I got my start in writing music through songwriting. And I think some people are surprised to hear that about me now, because I don't have a career as a singer-songwriter at all. It's just something that I did when I was a teenager, as a form of self-expression, as a form of communicating and making sense of the things that were going on around me. And I never played those songs in front of people. I never played them outside of my bedroom with the door closed, barricaded in with pillows, So, yeah, I mean, any chance I get to kind of reflect on that and what that used to feel like, and then compare that to now, where I have students and professionals interacting with my music all over the world every day. It's
Amazing.
kind of unbelievable. Yeah. So you could say that it's been a dream of mine for most of my life. And to make a living writing music for others to play is really, really fulfilling and amazing. So I love it.
Amazing. Do you have little manuscript? Did you write music on manuscript paper, or have it transcribed by somebody as when you were a kid? Do you have that?
Yeah. So my parents found, my mom keeps everything and in boxes of stuff. And at some point last year, the year before, she found some papers of mine that I had scribbled down, pieces of music that weren't real, they weren't real music notation. No one else would be able to interpret it. I basically made my own set of symbols that I understood to mean, the music goes up, the melody goes up, the melody goes down. I didn't know how to write music, so I just made something up. And yeah, I mean, even now I start out, my process involves a lot of handwritten stuff. I don't write out the entire score for every single thing that I do, but it's a lot of almost graphic score type stuff, where there's squiggles and shapes and lots of arrows, and mixed in with words, mixed in with proper music notation. And actually, okay, wait, I know the people listening won't see, but here's an example of, there's just a squiggle at the bottom of this manuscript paper. What on earth does that mean? But I know that was meant to depict the contour of this particular piece that I was working on, in a non-musical way, more of a narrative way. So
that's so cool.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's how it started when I was a kid, because I didn't have formal music instruction. And so I made up a language that made sense to me. And I guess in a sense, I'm still doing that. It's just that I also am communicating it in a way that other people can read.
Yeah, that's so cool. Yeah. As a kid, I found recent, this is last year or whatever, whenever I was doing a big clean. But I also found I found manuscript paper, a simple little melody, probably isn't good, but my mom had transcribed it for me. Piece by Mirabelle.
That's so sweet.
It's so cute. Yeah. Yeah, that's cool. Is anybody else in your family musical?
No, but they're all music appreciators, right? When I was growing up, my parents had music playing in the house all the time. We went on long drives because my grandparents lived up in cottage country, and we went to visit them. It was a few-hour drive. So there was always radio on, or we would put CDs of Broadway shows or whatever. Like there was just music around all the time. So even though my parents weren't musicians themselves, they definitely supported that interest and took me to like the orchestra kid shows and the local theater and stuff like that. So yeah, I grew up kind of around the arts in an indirect way, more in like the audience way, I guess. My brother is like, I guess, an amateur musician. Like he can strum some chords on a guitar,
Nice.
just for fun. But yeah, it's just me that kind of went the more formal route, and certainly the only one that made a career of it. So.
Yeah, you're the pro.
Yeah.
So what instrument did you play in band?
I played the bass clarinet.
Oh.
Yeah. So I started on the clarinet. That's, you couldn't start a kid on the bass clarinet. That's not.
It's like as tall as you when you're a kid.
It certainly was. My parents were like, "What? Why?" Yeah, no, I started on the clarinet and I didn't have a lot of success with it. I really struggled at the beginning. And it's funny to think that probably of those people in elementary school, I can't imagine that anyone else is like still playing the instrument that they started on, and I had such a hard time back then. But yeah, so my music teacher at the time was like, we need someone to play the bass clarinet. There's only one in the whole school. And something about that appealed to me, like being a little bit more independent as a kid. I liked to do my own thing. And I liked the idea that it was just me on that instrument. So yeah, I really fell in love with playing in band once I started playing the bass clarinet, because bass lines are so much fun. True. And I improvised a lot.
Oh, really?
I mean, I had to be told a couple times, like, just play what's on the page. Oh. But it's boring playing whole notes when you're a kid, when you're playing in the low end of the band. It's not always the most interesting parts. So I like to think that also contributed to like what made me become a composer a little bit, because I was already thinking about how could I make this more interesting, right? And so now that I'm writing for middle school bands, high school bands, I try to not give anyone whole notes the entire time.
Oh, that's nice. That's like a nice redemption kind of story.
Yeah, I know. I've been there myself, right? So I know what it's like. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. The improvising part, like, do you have like a composition process now? Or is it maybe it's different probably every time?
Yeah, it's different every time. There are some similarities though. So most of my work the past 5 years has been commissions, and I'm very, very grateful that that's the case. To be in a position where I'm paid to write custom music for people, that's seriously the dream. Yeah. But it does mean that I have to take into consideration somebody else's requests or parameters or limitations or whatever when I'm approaching a new project, as opposed to a personal project where it's just, I'm following my own inspiration, or I can do kind of whatever I want. Yeah. So the process with commissions is just a little bit more intricate. Kind of at the beginning, I have to map out like what the commissioner is looking for and kind of work within that. But whether it's a commission or a personal project, I tend to start outside. I like to go for big, long walks and think about maybe a story or a feeling or a place that I want to transport listeners to, or just I kind of think through and feel like what I might want to write about. And I find it difficult to come up with ideas sitting at a desk or even sitting at a piano or something. Like I have come to learn this about myself, that being in motion is an important aspect of the generation of ideas for me.
Why do you think that is?
I feel most myself when I'm out in nature. So I think being inside, I mean, you can only see a small view of my space, but there's plants everywhere. There's like nature art everywhere, photography and stuff. And I do my best to create an inspiring space even in my house, but there's nothing that compares to being in a cathedral of pine trees or, you know, my partner and I live down the road from a large wetland area, and the wildlife that we share this space with is very inspiring to me. So I think, yeah, just being outside, I can really tap into my surroundings, but also my inner, I don't know, it sounds cliche almost to say inner child, but like when I was a kid, I spent a lot of time outside by myself, just like digging in the soil and touching all the leaves of every plant and comparing how they felt. And like those early songs that I wrote or pieces that I composed with my own musical language that I referenced a few minutes ago, like they were all about animals, you know, and I think that's just what I've been inspired by the most over the course of my life. And so, yeah, getting out and connecting with that side of the world, I guess, is really helpful. But even when I lived in a city, like I lived in Toronto for over a decade, and there's nature there, but it's not the same as where I am now. And even then, going for a walk, even just on the streets of the city, helped me come up with ideas. So maybe it's not just nature. I think it's also when I allow energy to move through my body, I can process things a little bit better than when I have to be still. And even when I was a kid and I was in school, like I was never disruptive, but I was always doing something in addition to what we were supposed to be doing. So whether that was doodling or fidgeting or like kicking my feet under the desk or whatever it was, like I think I've always been there's some activity going on that helps me come up with stuff or retain information or communicate a little better or something like that. So yeah.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
It's really cool that's how you get your brain going and how you get inspired. I think that like music and nature is really intertwined. I think that a lot of music that I enjoy also draws a lot of inspiration from nature, and that seems to be the way it goes.
Yeah, I mean, from there, I mean, I do the bulk of my work inside. It's just that the initial ideas kind of come from nature, and then I improvise a lot at the piano, and I actually just record myself improvising so that I don't feel the pressure in the moment to write something down. I think a lot of composers and songwriters that are kind of just getting started often encounter this problem where, like, by the time they document the idea, by the time they write it down or notate it or record it or whatever the process is, maybe they've lost that initial idea a little bit. And so I've learned that if I just press record, I don't share those recordings with anyone. I don't do anything with them, but they're just documentation for me so that later on I can go back and revisit and see if there were any ideas that stood out to me that I want to go back and explore a little bit more. Sometimes in an hour of recording, there's only a few minutes that are, usable, but that's still worth it for the trade-off of having that flow of creative energy not be interrupted by the necessity of like, let me write that down.
The amount of times I wish that like I just had a microphone recording 24/7, just to pick up any accidental ideas.
Totally. Just like humming as you're walking around, like, oh, I wish someone got that. That was cool.
And by the time you take your phone out to record, it's like it's gone. It's gone.
Yeah, exactly. So I do my best to like create a setting for myself where, okay, I think I'm going to brainstorm a little bit here. I'm going to push record. I forget sometimes, but I do my best.
I think for me, it's that if I'm improvising on piano, like, because I do the same thing, but recording wise, it's only if I land on something that I like really like during that improv session, and then I hit record. But I think if I start with hitting record, I know, like, I'm so aware that that's happening. It's there, that like that creates the pressure for me already.
Right.
I gotta like forget about it and then I can do it. But yeah.
Yeah. I get that.
Yeah. So once you're back inside and you've got your ideas flowing, what do you do from there?
Yeah, so that would be when like this kind of thing comes into play. So I once I have an idea that I think I want to work with, I will usually write it down in words. So as an example, I just wrote this piece last week. I finished it up, and it's all about the movement of wind and how these big forces of wind come from the mountains and then they go kind of into the valley and um, through the rocks and over the rivers. And I was kind of imagining this story of personifying the wind. Like, what would it feel like to be the wind going on that journey? And then what would it feel like to maybe interact with other elements of the space? And then what would that sound like? And so I just list off lots of key words of how it might feel, other, aspects of the landscape that might be there. Is there, the sound of the wind through the trees is going to be different than the sound of the wind off of a cliff or um, like lapping over the water. And I don't know, I kind of just explore all of these concepts before I even write any music down. I just kind of, yeah, get a clearer vision in mind. I find that that's really helpful prep work, so that when I do sit down to start plugging in notes, uh, I I don't know, I just have a sense of structure. I don't write beginning to end, but I have a sense of like what the overall thing is. Is there going to be one big peak in the middle? Is it a gradual build towards the end? Do we start really big and fall away? And those kinds of, I guess, visual or sensory based things are really helpful for me in my process. And then after all of that, I do get into just writing notes and rhythms and stuff. And I use a program called Dorico for music notation. And I use that to create a score and parts for all of the instruments that are involved. I use Note Performer to create audio reference tracks. It's not the same as like live musicians with real instruments, but it's not too bad. It's better than the built-in MIDI. So yeah, and then the fun part is orchestrating all the ideas, deciding which instruments are going to get which parts, and moving all the pieces around. With the piece that I just finished last week, at the last minute, I decided to cut a chunk of music that was supposed to be for the end and put it near the beginning, and it completely altered the feel of the whole thing. So
Wow.
I don't know. My process is a little bit messy, I think, but I'm learning to just embrace it. And I've been doing this full time for 5 years now, and I guess if it hasn't changed, like if my chaotic, messy process hasn't changed, and I'm still creating music that feels genuine and represents the needs of the people who commission me, then it must be working, even though it feels a little bit crazy. So
Wow. That's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I never really thought about how you could move around all the pieces in your compositions. That's really cool.
Yeah, I actually write on sticky notes sometimes, or like pieces of paper. I think like movie editors do this, like film crew people. When you're making a storyboard, like you can actually write kind of events on sticky notes or cards, and then like move them around visually to help get a sense of the overall structure. Um, and I find that that is helpful as well, just so that you don't have to keep it all in mind. You can see a little more visually, like these are all the sections of music that I have. I have this theme, I have this counter melody, and then play around with the order, play around with like transitions from one to the next. And I found with that piece recently that I could come up with a transition from this section to this section and then substitute a new section and create a transition that's just as effective to that. And so sometimes I create, I think, maybe more problems for myself than I need to, because I'm like, I could do anything.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm playing around with visual tools like that to kind of help in the process a bit.
Oh, that's so smart. Yeah, because like when I make a video edit, like I recently just shot a video of Calgary Wind Symphony for their
Oh,
concert.
cool.
And so I'm
Yeah.
putting together like a little promo video for them. And like I mean, it's just all laid out in the video editor, like in Premiere. You
Yeah.
can see all the clips and everything. And it is fun to just like drag things around and
Yeah.
reorder things, you know? But I never actually thought about that in terms of composition, you know, like making
Yeah.
it visual in that way. That's
Mhm.
cool.
I mean, different things are going to work for different people,
Yeah.
and not everyone works that way. But yeah, I found it to be helpful.
Yeah, and also like the thing about giving parts to different instruments and stuff.
Mhm.
More people I know just like have an idea of the sound that they want and the instruments that they want to play it like
Mhm.
already before they have the melodies and stuff written out. Like they have the instrument in mind first, but it seems like for you have that comes a little bit later.
Yeah, it depends. There are certain pieces where, like, I have a melody in mind, and I know for sure that it's going to be on the trumpet or the clarinet or whatever. Like, I sometimes I do have a really clear idea of exactly what this thing sounds like in my head. But I would say most of the time, I don't know, I kind of operate on feelings. Like,
Yeah.
how does it feel? How do I want the audience to feel in this moment as they experience this part of the piece? Or even, how do I want the musicians to feel? Is this part a little bit stressful? um, and can I use that intentionally to my advantage to create a moment of tension? And can I choose a key signature that I know is idiomatic to the people that are playing versus something that is going to, I don't know, challenge them a little bit? The
Can I
outcome,
make their lives harder?
yeah, like I think and like, not just to be like, oh, like, let's just make it hard for everybody, but to actually use that as a tool to create a different experience for everybody involved. Because the same chord progressions, the same melodies, feel different in a different tonality, in a different key. I mean, even this applies to songwriting too. Like, I'm sure you've experienced this before, where you play something and then you put a capo on the guitar and you're like, feels different up here, you know?
Yeah.
And sometimes those choices really impact the end result, I guess. So yeah, I feel like I went on a tangent there. But yeah, I definitely, sometimes I have a specific kind of instrumentation in mind as I'm creating it, but a lot of the time I just know what I want it to maybe feel like in that moment. And then I experiment a little bit with how to best create that moment, using different colors and textures from within the ensemble that I'm working with.
Yeah,
It's a lot
that's
of
really
fun.
cool. Yeah, it's really
Yeah.
fun. How did your first commission happen? Like, how did you kind of build all that up?
Yeah, that's a good question. I so I was teaching, and I was teaching middle school band, and it was very loud and very exhausting, but amazing. I loved my students, and I had really great colleagues, and I was very passionate about that work as well. But so I was making arrangements for the bands that I was conducting, and I was testing out um, ideas for my own pieces with my students, and getting a sense of what they liked and what they were looking for in the music that we were playing. You know, I asked for feedback a lot, even in music that wasn't mine. You know, we're playing some arrangement for a concert, and I was always very interested to know from the students, what do you like about this? What do you not like about this? You know, who in this ensemble wishes that they had more to do, or, you know. And so I really learned how to write for that kind of purpose, from hands-on experiences that I had working with those kinds of musicians. So I started writing more for that level and trying to spread the word to other music teachers. I still, at that point, I really didn't envision um, the widespread kind of exposure that I have now in the music education world, but I just wanted more local music teachers to play my music. I wanted to see if I could reach more musical communities within Canada. Um, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, um, growing up and playing in all these ensembles and not playing music by living composers or not playing music by people of color or women and just young people doing something fresh and genuine. Like I kind of felt like there was a void. There was something missing in the music that was available to, especially to young bands. And so I just started spreading the word with that in mind. Like, hey, if you're looking for music to play that's by a local composer, you can tell your students that you know the person who wrote this. You can, like, I will come visit your school, or I'll do a video call with your band if they're on the other side of the country, and you can put a face to the name, and the kids can ask questions about how the music was made. And people just were really excited about that. And now we do everything on Zoom and Google and Discord and Twitch and all that. Like everything is on video and everything. But at the time, like 2016, that was not nearly as common. So I think there was a bit of just the novelty of getting to work with the composer live and getting some of that insight, and knowing that I was not just a composer, but an educator as well. I didn't have the problems of, our band can't play this, like this is too hard, or they don't know this scale yet, or they don't know, like I was able to just really cater to their needs, I think. And so people started to ask me if I would write for their school. And that's kind of just where it all began. I never really solicited that. Like I didn't say I'm looking for people to commission me. It just, I would say it happened pretty organically. They just asked and I said, sure, I'll try. And it grew more and more to the point where I was starting to feel guilty that I was not giving 100% to my teaching job. And I also felt like I wasn't able to give 100% to my creative projects either, because I was a full-time teacher and it was way too much to manage. And I ended up getting a pretty big commission from the University of Portland, and they wanted to involve schools all over the continent, all over North America. And I just felt like I couldn't say no to that. And so I said yes. And long story short, I ended up leaving my teaching position and deciding to see if I could make it work as a composer. And as I said, that was 5 years ago. So
wow,
I'm doing it.
Wow. Look at you.
Yeah. But being an educator is still super important to me. And that's why I love doing those residencies, virtually and in person, getting to connect with the people that are playing my music. And I still feel like I'm an education-minded person. And that really drives a lot of how and why I compose. So.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Do you think that, like, when you took that step, when the University of Portland offered that to you, was it, because I think I would just assume that I would feel like there's no going back if I do this, but obviously, like, you had your teaching job and you could probably fall back on that, right? But.
Yeah, not that specific job, because I left at what I think was probably a relatively inconvenient time for them. But yeah, I mean, the teaching certificate is not something that goes away. Like I have a Bachelor of Education, a Bachelor of Music Education. Like those are credentials that are going to exist forever. And the experiences that I have in the classroom and being a clinician and being a conductor and like all of those skills, I did feel that, yeah, if this doesn't work out as a composer, I can always go back to teaching. Not the exact same job, but I could find work in some capacity doing something. Or I would maybe do a blend of, maybe I would teach part-time, or I could teach privately. I could open a studio, or I could lean more into doing like guest workshops and that kind of thing. So I never felt like it's all or nothing. Like if this doesn't work, I'm totally screwed. I never felt like that, but I was very conscious that if I had a plan B, like if I gave myself a backup plan, that I would use it. And I wanted to really create, I guess, a blank slate for myself where I could just really give it my all. And, because if you have something else that's a little bit easier, most of us, I think, are inclined to do that, right?
Yeah.
If there's a smoother path, we'll probably take that. So I wanted to really like give myself the opportunity to try and not have anything else. And now I've built back in lots of education type of work in addition to my creative work. And I do like public speaking type things with schools, and I feel that I've achieved a pretty decent balance of the things that are important to me. But it was definitely messy at first, and it was scary to make that leap. And there was no guarantee that anything was going to work. I was certainly concerned that I was not going to make enough money doing it. I knew that I would enjoy it, but could I live off of it was the concern, right? So it took a lot of work and a lot of making connections and maintaining relationships with the right people, and taking initiative to go and be in the communities that I was trying to work with and for. So lots and lots of work, but I'm proud of what I've built. I'm happy about it.
Yeah, it's super cool to see, like, as you've mentioned already, like, you're a woman composer with Asian background, and like like I've never played, aside from your music, like I've never I've never played that in band in school or anything. So yeah, it is really cool to see what you're doing and like how you're doing it so well. Also.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, it's really meaningful to me to get the feedback from students, especially who see themselves represented in my music, and for teachers to send me a message and tell me, my kids love your music, and I teach in a neighborhood where there's a lot of, people from a variety of demographics, a lot of minority, students. And we just so appreciate having music that reflects our diverse society and our community. And like those things mean so much to me, way more than the praise of like other composers or professors or like getting awards. Like I don't really care about that stuff. It's, am I making an impact on the next generation of musicians? Because I know what it was like to be that kid that was the other, and to feel empowered by music on your music stand. Like that's a huge, it seems like a small thing. But I know that it really does make an impact in those communities. So that's the most fulfilling aspect of what I do, for sure.
Yeah, that's amazing. So how did you learn how to publish your music and like do that whole process of getting your music out there?
I am still learning. I publish my own music primarily because I don't want to give any of my money to a publishing company. The average cut that a composer makes on a sale of like print music that's distributed by a publisher is 10%. That's so little. And there are publishers now, there are independent publishers or smaller publishing companies that are working to kind of change those ratios, which is amazing. But still, as the creator of your work, I think that you should maintain control over what happens with that work, maintaining all the rights to it, getting to make all the decisions about, who has access to what and when things are published and who they're shared with and all of that. Like that stuff is really important to me. So I knew from the start that I wanted to do it myself. I write music that is a little different from at least the composers that I am familiar, like that I kind of grew up playing their music, or the composers that I went to school with that were studying composition. Like, because I don't have that formal training, I have lots of formal training in music, but not in composition specifically. So, yeah, I wanted to just do it myself, I guess, long story short. And so I learned how to use different programs to export the music and then make the parts look, decent, legible for other people. And I have made a lot of mistakes on that front. I think the scores and parts that I produce now are 100 times better than they were when I started, because I know better now, and I've gotten a lot of feedback from people about, like, we don't like to see this, or this is an awkward page turn, and I didn't consider that. So there's been lots of things that I've learned over the years. So I think the way that I learned how to publish was just by publishing and kind of trial and error. Like, let's see what works. And I do have lots of friends in the industry, lots of conductors and other composers that I can kind of run things by. Like, does this look good to you? Hey, does someone want to take a look at this and see if they catch anything that stands out that's an error? Or, can someone print this out and see if it's too small, before I had a big scale printer? Like, I really leaned on community, I think, when I first started. And I gave music away for free, or for like very little money at the beginning, in exchange for a recording, in exchange for the opportunity to hear the piece played, so that I could get a sense of what worked and what didn't. Like, I don't know. I don't have all the answers even still. It's just been a really like learning as I go kind of a process. And I wouldn't have it any other way. Although there are lots of things that I wish there was a handbook for, like, even when you go to music school, there's so much about the business side of making a life as a musician that we all just have to figure out ourselves, or amongst ourselves, like asking questions of other people in the space. And I wish that there were more discussions about money. I wish there were more discussions about your rights as a creator, copyright stuff, licensing things. Like, there's just so much that we have to figure out on our own. So yeah, I'm very much still learning, but doing okay so far.
Doing okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I also wish that we had more conversations like that in school.
Yeah.
And I mean, there are music schools out there that do, like, they do have music business courses, degrees, and like they do talk about this, but it's not everywhere yet. And I had just another flutist on the podcast last season, and we were talking a lot about, how like, it seems like when you're in school, when you're in it, it seems like the only options are really to become a band teacher or to become an orchestra player, and those are the only options and nothing else. So but when, like, the reality is that, not everybody's fit to be a teacher, or not everybody has the discipline to practice to be so dedicated to your craft to, like, rise to the level of an orchestral musician. So, like, it is hard. And it is cool, though, to see that, like, everybody actually is making their own path. Like, just another flutist she's got the YouTube thing going on, and she's teaching, and like, she has her own studio now, and you're doing this. And like, there are actually so many different ways that you can make money and stuff. But
totally. Yeah, I think those are important discussions to have. You mentioned that not everyone's fit to be a teacher. Like, it is an incredibly demanding job. I know on this podcast you talk about mental health and things like that. Like, that's also one of the reasons that I left my teaching job. It was not that I didn't love it. And it was not entirely just that I wanted to be a composer. also was that I was incredibly burnt out
Mm.
and overworked and under-resourced and just trying to keep everything afloat somehow, and that um, physical, mental, emotional exhaustion is not something that everyone is able to manage sustainably on a long-term basis.
Right.
And I definitely learned that about myself. And so I think the career that I've created now allows for more flexibility. It allows me to move at my own pace. And I think it's scary to kind of leave more structured, traditional uh, pathways and forge your own. But everyone that I know that's done it has said that it's worth it. And I would agree. So.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm curious to know, like, how often do you get to hear the bands perform your music?
Yeah, that's a cool question. I think before the pandemic, it was a lot more. I was traveling a lot more, and I was invited to be a guest composer for an honor band or a music festival or something like that. Like that kind of thing happened a lot more before the pandemic. Things like that are happening again now, but my relationship with that side of my work has shifted a little bit. And um, I've been working through, I guess, some pretty severe creative burnout in the last
Mm.
couple of years. So I've had to prioritize my health and I've had to prioritize getting my projects done. So I've been doing less traveling and just the nature of, the difficulties throughout the pandemic. I think that also just shifted things a little bit. But I get to hear recordings, which is great.
Mhm.
And I love it when people send me their concert programs, either like a PDF or sometimes if they've printed copies, they'll send it or send a picture of it or something. And it really makes me happy to know that my music is being played and heard all over the place. And I actually, when I first started doing this, I made a map. Like I printed off a map of North America and just like a blank, with all the states and provinces and stuff, just blank. And I colored them in when I had a performance of my music in that place. And last year, I was able to like completely, it's filled in. So my
Wow.
concert music has been played in every province, every state in the US. And now I have like a world one because there's countries all over the world as well. So although I don't maybe get to experience my music played live with me there as much as I would like to or as much as before, um, I am tracking it and it is incredibly motivating. Just to know that someone on the other side of the world has just purchased my music and to think of those kids that are now getting to play it. Like next week, I have a Zoom call with an honor band in South Korea,
Mhm.
and the students are coming from Vietnam, Japan, Thailand, like all over Asia, and they're going to this festival and they're playing one of my pieces, and I'm gonna zoom in and talk to all of them. So this is like they get to meet an Asian Canadian composer from the other side of the world. They're playing my music over there. Um, that stuff is just really cool to
That's
me. Like
incredible.
that never gets old.
Yeah.
um, yeah, and it is always a magical experience to hear my music played by real musicians as opposed to the MIDI or the ideas that I have in my head. So yeah, it's a really special part of the process. I think part of the reason that the burnout that I've been experiencing kind of started during the pandemic was actually because I was creating these works and not getting to hear them.
Mm.
I think that took a lot out of me, and I didn't realize it at the time, but it's a hugely vulnerable, personal, draining experience to create something and to put it out into the world and just it's like it's just in a void out there and you have no idea how it's doing.
Wow.
I think that was really starting to get to me Because typically with a commission, especially, the composer gets to attend the world premiere and be in the audience and sometimes even speak to the audience or work with the performers ahead of time. And those connections, I think, are really important in completing the creative process, like the cycle of the seed of an idea all the way to hearing the real thing, experiencing the real thing. So I think missing that has been part of the problem for me over the past few years. But there are ways that we move through it. So
yeah. What do you do to recover from burnout?
It's a good question. I don't know. I'm not the expert here. It's still a very real situation for me that I'm working through. Certainly, time in nature is healing for me. I think taking a break is important. So whether that's, just taking a break in the day or a larger scale, like I'm going to take a few days, a few weeks, a few months, even, like, I think just taking a step back and having some space from whatever it is that you're working on, like, that can be helpful, but that's not always an option. Sometimes with deadlines, with external pressures, with things that I said that I would do, or you don't always have the option to take as much time as would be ideal. And I've learned over the past few years that I think I like working slowly. I like having the time to have an idea live within me for a bit before I have to make it into something that is for other people. And so I'm actually, as I finish up the last few commissions, I'm not taking any new commissions for the foreseeable future.
Oh, wow.
I'm saying at least a year. It might be more than that. I don't know how it's going to feel, but it's been 5 years of writing commissions, and I need to reconnect with my personal process, I think, and recalibrate a little bit. Spend time just as a music listener, as a maybe even as a performer, like playing songs by other people or playing songs by me, but just not feeling that pressure to continuously create new stuff. I'm happy with my concert music catalog. I'm just going to let it be for a little bit. And I'm going to come back to band commissions, but I think part of healing from burnout is really properly distancing from that pressure and reconnecting with myself and the things that make me me, and rekindling just the fire within, like the desire to create. I feel that I've lost that a little bit in the past couple of years. When you make your passion your work, like when you make the thing that you love, the thing that you do for money, your relationship with that thing drastically changes. And it's not all bad, but it's different for sure. So I think I just need a period of time to really reset, and then I'll go from there.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. When you are feeling this burnout, but you do have a commission deadline, have you ever kind of just like told them you can't and you don't do it? Or has that ever happened, or like been able to delay it?
Yeah, I've definitely delayed things. The piece I finished last week was supposed to be done in December. And I'm thankful to have collaborators that are flexible. Not all the time, but in a lot of cases, they understand that what they're asking for is for me to create something for them. And, it's mutually beneficial to make sure that what I'm delivering, it has had enough time to really come to be something that I'm happy with. And it doesn't benefit anybody to rush. So although sometimes my collaborators are maybe disappointed to have to wait a little longer or frustrated with just not understanding how that process goes, like, commissions are not a transactional thing. I mean, a lot of people don't consider that, but it's not like, here's the money, now in exchange I get a thing. Like there's so much more to it than that. Um, and it's highly collaborative. I spend time understanding what they're looking for. And, the band that I finished the piece for last week, I found out that there are certain instruments in that ensemble that those kids are like really keen and really strong. And so I made sure to tailor the piece to emphasize that ensemble's strengths while still making it something that other ensembles publicly after the premiere, like that it would still be suitable for them too.
Right.
It takes a lot of thought to create something like that. So yes, I have asked for extensions. I have told people that, I could get it done this month, but if I have an extra few weeks, I think it would be better. And in all of those cases, I've been met with, yeah, take the time you need, or like, that makes sense to us. Sometimes it's something like, we have our concert date set and we were really hoping to perform this at this concert. So in those cases, it's a little bit less flexible because it's not an open-ended deadline. Like, yeah, whenever you get it, we'll be excited. Sometimes it's like, it's for this occasion. Like, I've written a couple of pieces that are celebrating, the 100th anniversary of this organization or the 30th year of this national ensemble, stuff like that. And so it's a little bit more time sensitive in those situations. And I do keep that in mind. But it's tough. Sometimes it's just like, yeah, because I feel so guilty about it, right? Like it's not cheap. Like they're giving me money to create something for them, and to feel the fear of letting somebody down, combined with the fear of pushing myself to the point of no return, combined with like, I know that I can do it, but I can't do it now. Or I know, like, there's just a lot of inner conflict that comes up in those kinds of situations. But open communication is always the best solution, like asking for more time or just letting them know, this is what I have so far. Let me know what you think, but I'm going to need a bit more time to finish it. Like, I think people at the end of the day just are excited about it. And
yeah. What are kind of like the conversations that you have with like a band director who wants to commission you for work?
So I always ask for guidelines on duration, difficulty, instrumentation, and any like thematic requests. Maybe the piece is being commissioned, as I mentioned, for a specific occasion, to celebrate somebody's retirement or, an anniversary or something like that. So I like to know those things, because that way I know, am I writing a celebratory piece? Am I writing something a little more somber to mark the occasion of something heavier? Am I, those kinds of conversations are important at the beginning. And then things like within instrumentation, it's more than just, wind ensemble. Well, how many horn players do you have? How many percussionists do you have? Are there any areas within the band that are really strong or that need a little bit more support? Can I keep that in mind as I'm creating the parts? Because we were talking about how I would make decisions of which instruments get which things. And I take all of that into consideration based on the needs of the group. So we have lots of conversations about that stuff. And then I like to ask them, how do you want to feel after the last note? Because it forces people to actually imagine that moment. Like, do you want to feel hopeful? Do you want to feel resolved? Do you want to feel that there's suspense? Like it's a cliffhanger. How do you want to experience that moment where the sound has faded away, the audience hasn't clapped yet? Like that sacred little moment there. I love to prompt people with things like that. And their responses are really helpful for me in how I approach the piece. I don't always do exactly what they want, but I try my best to take it into consideration and mix it in with my own agenda as well. If
Mm-hmm.
there's something that I really want to make, most of the time I can weave in something that's really personal to me and something that also is relatable and tailored to the group or the person that's asked me to write it. And that's, I think, the most fun part about doing commissions, even though I'm going into a season of taking a break from that stuff. That is an aspect of it that I really love. It's like a big puzzle, how can I make this something that is true for me, that came from me, but that is also special for the people who commissioned it.
How often, well, I mean, I guess you kind of mentioned like with your burnout, it's because you don't really have time to create anything for yourself. But I
Yeah.
was wondering like how often, if you ever get to create for yourself versus, the ratio between that and making something for somebody else.
Yeah. Definitely the proportions are kind of skewed. Like I've been doing a lot of commissions.
Mhm.
And that just happens because I couldn't believe that people really wanted to pay me to make music for them. And I, especially in my first and second year, um, as a full-time composer, like I still was very worried that I wasn't going to make enough money. And so I really was just kind of saying yes to everything. And
Mhm.
that was a mistake. But there's no way that I would have known that without living through it. So
Yeah.
it's all good. But there are things that I do for myself, because I think it's important, even if music is your job, that you also have an outlet that is just for you personally. And so a couple years ago, I started learning how to play the banjo. Um, that has nothing to do with my composer career.
Yeah.
It's just I love learning new instruments. I find it really fun to be a beginner at something and start from scratch. And so um, I enjoy learning new instruments. I enjoy um, playing covers of songs that I like and reimagining them in new ways. Um, I still I don't write songs nearly as much as I used to. I'm hoping to get back into that this year as I wrap up the sort of band commissions chapter of the past
Yeah.
5 years and make space for different things. Um, so, yeah, I would say the answer is not nearly as often as I would like lately, making music for myself, but I'm looking forward to doing more of that in the next little while.
Yeah. What?
Yeah.
Why banjo?
um, it's well, okay. The short story is there was a banjo here. My partner is also a musician, and he had a banjo that he never played that was just in the closet. And I actually didn't realize that he had it listed on Marketplace to try to sell. And on the day that I picked it up and just started noodling around with it, that was the day that he found a buyer.
Oh.
And he was like, I was going to sell that. And I was like, okay. He goes, but if you're going to play it, like you can, I won't sell it.
Mm.
And so luckily he didn't sell it.
Oh.
It was just weird timing because I don't know. I was listening to um, Notes from the Archive by Maggie Rogers. She released this album of songs that were old. So she felt that she wanted to honor her past self by releasing recordings of music that she had written in high school and in her early 20s. And she played the banjo on a lot of those early tracks. And if you listen to the version of the album that has her commentary, it's amazing because you get to hear some of the background stories of her process and her thoughts in present day about the music she'd written a long time
Ooh.
ago. It's really cool. And she talked about how she learned the banjo because as a teenager, everyone she was around, like all the guys played the guitar and all the guys played drums and bass. And um, she was one of the only girls. And she learned that if she played a different instrument that nobody played, she would always get to play. And so I mean, I don't necessarily think that's why I wanted to learn the banjo, but I was inspired by that story. I really liked her songs. And in order to play those songs, like, I mean, I could play them on the piano or the guitar, but I knew that my partner had a banjo and I was like, let's see if I can learn some Maggie Rogers songs on this banjo that happens to be here. And I just, yeah, I really loved it. It was a lot of fun. It was something completely different. I'm left-handed, so
Oh,
learning how to do finger picking with my right
me
hand was
too.
like super hard. Nice. Yay, lefties. I find all the right hand like picking stuff with string instruments to be really challenging for me. Um, so I think it was just a fun way to push myself to do something new. And
Mhm.
I was able to tap into new genres of music too. Like now I listen to bluegrass music a lot, and I did not listen to bluegrass music before I started playing the banjo. So it's opened up a lot of things for me. And it's really fun. And it's something that I don't have to do in a serious way necessarily. Like I can just do it because it's fun.
Yeah.
Um, so that's not like personal projects necessarily, but it's just like things that I do to keep my relationship with music a fun one as well, in
Mhm.
addition to a stressful work fueled thing.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel that. I talked about it before on the podcast, but like going to school for flute performance,
Hmm.
like that gets pretty I got pretty burnt out with that. And so
Yeah.
songwriting, playing guitar has always just been my fun side hobby.
Yeah.
That's just always kept me going. So like, yeah,
Hmm.
like I didn't have to think about theory or anything on the guitar. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
it's nice to have that outlet and just, be able to do whatever you want without any, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah. So it seems like you travel a lot and you'd go into nature a lot. Um, what's your favorite place that you've been to and or where would you want to visit?
Hmm. Okay. First thing that comes to mind is just anything in the Pacific Northwest. um, every time I have the opportunity to visit the West Coast, I just feel like I belong here.
Do you think
um,
you'd move there?
yes,
Yeah.
I would love to. Not immediately, like not in the immediate future, but um, I have a life goal of living in BC. Um, maybe not forever, like permanently, but even just for a year or two. Like I think that's something that I would like to experience. My ancestors were from BC.
Mm.
On my Japanese side of my family, they settled in Victoria, BC, and before the war, well, like the Second World War led to the forced displacement and incarceration of Japanese Canadians. So my family ended up in Ontario,
Mm.
completely disconnected from the Japanese Canadian community in BC. And I feel very strongly that my family would have stayed in BC if that was an option.
Yeah.
They were farmers and um, very connected to nature as well. Even the part of Japan that they came from was like a beautiful lake with forests and stuff. So I do feel that it's in my blood to be connected with nature in that way.
Mhm.
Um, so I think it would be really fulfilling and inspiring and magical to live in BC at least for some period of time. So that's definitely a life goal of mine.
Mhm.
Um, I I really enjoy visiting like anywhere that I have the opportunity to visit, and I don't really like cities that much. So if I'm going somewhere for work and it's in a city, I will find the nearest like national park or state park or even just like small wooded area or like a bog or um I get a lot of energy and inspiration from just spending time in different places,
Mhm.
getting to know the native plants and animals and birds and things to a particular place that brings me a lot of joy. So I don't have a favorite, but I do feel that those like big old growth forests are really magical and beautiful, and um, mountains are always nice to see, even if off in the distance. But I live in southwestern Ontario. I've really come to love the wetlands. It's such a unique ecosystem, and it's home to so many beings that are so inspiring to me. So I think everyone kind of idolizes the, people that are naturey and outdoorsy. It's like we idolize the big mountainous landscapes and like, but there's actually so much to be discovered even in urban wildlife areas, right? Like even in cities, there are pockets that are, there are city trees, there are streams, ravines that go through the city of Toronto, there are waterways that, provide a lot of habitat. So I don't know. I think I don't really have a good answer to that, just that anywhere. But I would love to visit Japan. I think that's important for me in the kind of identity work that I've been doing as well, reconnecting with sides of myself that I've suppressed for a long time. So visiting Japan would be really cool. I think my favorite place though was my grandparents' place when I was growing up, a cabin, cottage, whatever you want to call it, in Northern Ontario. So that's definitely kind of where all of my love of nature started. So that'll always be my favorite.
Yeah. Sorry, my mind was just like, is cottage a East Coast thing that people say,
so.
And then West Coast people say cabins?
I think so. It's like the same thing, but I think here we say cottage, but it's a cabin. It's the same. Yeah.
Yeah, like I hear people say cabins, like when they want to go visit their cabin in the mountains,
Yeah.
They don't really say cottage.
Yeah. I think the cottage gives the feel of like, especially now, they're not even really cabins. The cottages that are made now are like these mansions that are on waterfront properties, right? So that's not what I'm talking about. Like I'm talking about a more rugged, like cabin in a forest on a water kind of thing.
I love that.
It's been in my family forever. But yeah, it's funny that like regional discrepancies of how we talk about things.
Yeah. Do you think that like, is it your grandparents' influence that got you so interested in all the wildlife and all the nature?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that anyone specific like showed me anything. It was just I was very curious as a child. I wanted to know everything about everything. And so like if a bird, I think most people it's like, "Oh, that's a bird," but I'd be like, "What is that bird? Do they live here all the time? Where do they fly to? Where did they fly from? Like I just had so many questions about everything. And luckily my family members entertained that for the most part and supported that interest. And my mom is an avid gardener, so maybe less so on the like wilderness kind of side of things, but she was always planting flowers, and we grew tomatoes and raspberries in the backyard and stuff like that. So I think I did grow up around those kinds of influences. And my grandfather like showed me how to use binoculars so we could see the loons on the lake really far away. And so it's little things like that. There was never anyone who was an expert in anything, but the support was there when I showed interest. So yeah.
Aw, that's cute. I'm just imagining like, when little kids just keep asking why, but like you had more specific whys.
Yeah. I'm like, why is the female cardinal brown and the male cardinal's red? And what, like, I just wanted to know everything about everything.
Oh.
And, I'm still like that. So
yeah, I guess that really plays into the concepts of your compositions that you mentioned earlier, like how you come up with those, like you're thinking about all these things and that plays into how you compose. That's really
definitely cool. Yeah, thanks.
But yeah, speaking about all this nature and trees and wilderness and everything, like forest therapy, you're a forest guide.
I am.
Like, what is that and what does that entail?
So I'm a certified forest therapy guide. Forest therapy or forest bathing, I don't know if you've heard of forest bathing. In Japan it's called Shinrin Yoku. And that translates to taking in the forest atmosphere or bathing in the forest. And essentially, it's a form of mindfulness that is based in nature connection. And it involves experiencing nature through all of our senses. So the more obvious ways to connect with nature, like if you go for a walk, maybe you're looking around at all the different things around you. But sometimes we forget that, if we pay attention to the smells, if we pay attention to the sounds, if we really stop and notice what's happening around us, we can really connect with an environment in a deeper way. And the, I guess, goal, we don't really talk about goals, but the idea of, why someone might try forest therapy is just essentially to kind of arrive at a state of awareness and mindfulness. Some people might refer to it as a meditative state or a flow state or a state of interconnectedness. There's lots of different words. But my role as a guide is to help people find that state of connection. Because it's a little bit different. A forest therapy walk is a little bit different than a naturalist walk or just a walk in the woods for exercise or for foraging, or, like there's lots of different amazing purposes of going for a walk. But a forest therapy walk is very slow, very mindful, and I offer prompts for nature connection. So something would be like, we would arrive at a point in a forest, let's say, and I would invite you to notice what's in motion. And so everyone just standing, looking around, like maybe the obvious things are the trees are swaying, or if it's fall, the leaves are moving or something. But as you spend 10, 15 minutes, like really taking in what's in motion, people notice ants moving on the ground, or like a woodpecker making its way up the side of a tree really far away. Like it takes time to really come into your surroundings and to achieve that level of awareness where you're noticing things that are not so obvious at first sight. And I love the sound-based invitations where it's, not just noticing what sounds you hear, but specifically what are the farthest sounds, like the sounds that are the farthest away, and what are the sounds that are closer to you? What are the sounds that are moving? And there's just so much that is available to us to be noticed. And sometimes we are moving at such a fast pace in society. There's a lot of stress, a lot of pressure, that we don't feel that we have the time to stop and notice those things. So I see my role as a guide as just being I'm not a therapist. Nature is the therapist, but I help people connect in ways that they may not have thought of on their own, or may not have made the time for on their own. And it can help with improved quality of sleep, reducing stress, lowering blood pressure. It can boost creativity and focus. It can help people develop empathy. It can help children in so many ways with making connections with one another and with themselves and their emotions, and finding some language to express those things. So it's something that I've been doing on my own for a long time. But it was only last year that I considered that I might be able to offer this to other people who may not have considered it. So I did the certification last year. And so that's a relatively new side of my work. But as I take some time away from missions and things like that, I'm creating space to lean into this kind of work a little bit more. So I'm excited about that.
That's amazing.
Thanks for asking about it.
Yeah. It's a lot. It sounds a lot more fun than like mindful meditation when you're just like here, when you're just like in your room. Because like, we used to do that before my flute lessons, and you would just, the sounds that you would hear are just like the trumpet next door, people having their lessons, or like the air conditioning turned on, stuff like that. But yeah, that is really cool. how did you even find, like, how do you get certified in this?
Yeah, there are a couple of different schools that offer courses. Some are retreat based, so it's similar to like a yoga teacher training kind of thing, where you have a private, like a personal practice. But some people at some point feel that they want to be able to facilitate that for others as well, and will go seek out that kind of training. So there are a few different schools that offer guide training. Some of them, like I said, are through retreats, like you go for a condensed, intense period of time. Others are more self-paced. The course that I took was a combination of online and outside. So we had weekly online sessions where we worked through the different concepts and had lots of discussions. It was a small group, about 10 of us that was in the course. And we could really offer a lot of support to one another. And then we had to do practice walks ourselves, guiding each other, guiding people in our lives, taking people out and trying things. And then we would come back to our class and give each other feedback. So um, it was really fulfilling. It was really fun. I met some people that are just as passionate about nature connection as I am, and it was a really cool thing. So I'm glad that I did that. The school that I did my training through is called the Forest Therapy School. It is what it sounds like. And it was founded by two women, and one of them is an artist. And I was just really drawn to their approach to training other guides. And I'm happy that I did it. It was really cool.
Wow.
I wanted to mention also, because you said something about how it sounds more fun than like meditation. So earlier in this conversation, I mentioned that I come up with my best ideas when I'm in motion, right? Um, on a similar note, I cannot meditate sitting down. I've tried many, many times over the years. It just doesn't work for me very well. I have a lot of anxiety, like a lot of the time. And so I think if I'm just sitting with no external stimuli, I'm like going through all the things in my head. However, when I'm outside, not necessarily in a forest therapy setting, but even just like in my backyard or going for a walk in the neighborhood or paddling on a kayak or whatever, like just something outside that involves movement, I can access that meditative state quite easily.
Oh, that's interesting.
So yeah, so as soon as I realized that about myself, I realized there are other people out there that are like me, and I bet I could help them, because we see a lot of stuff on social media, in um, things that we read and articles about mental health, and how helpful meditation and mindfulness is in managing mental health concerns. And yet so many of us struggle with doing those things. And I think that walking as a form of therapy and nature connection as a form of therapy is a relatively untapped resource. Like, I think that's something that so many people can benefit from. And a lot of people just maybe don't know where to start. So that's my goal personally, is just to help other people find what I have found through nature-based mindfulness, as opposed to the sit and meditate silently kind of thing. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, it's really nice that you want to give back in that way and have an impact on other people in that way. It's really cool.
Yeah, thanks.
So we have a couple Patreon questions.
Cool.
Chris asks, what is the most challenging aspect of being a composer, and what is the most rewarding?
Okay. The most rewarding, I think I've spoken about a little bit during this conversation, and it's the impact that I'm able to make on other musicians, other communities, um, and that the fulfillment that comes from um, knowing that musical ideas that I've shared have somehow impacted other people in a positive way. There's nothing that compares to that. Like, that's a really, really cool thing that I get to call my job. Um, And hearing my music played by developing musicians, like I think a lot of composers would kind of cringe at like, oh, it's so out of tune oboe and the snare player's lost and all sorts of stuff. I actually get a lot of enjoyment out of hearing that because um as a former teacher and as a former student, like I know what it's like to be in those early stages of figuring out how music works, figuring out how to play your instrument, how to listen to each other, and how to play together. And the idea that that learning is happening in the context of my music is really, really cool to me. So I'm less concerned about a perfect performance. And I'm more interested in, are people learning through the music that I've given them? Are people making connections with the world around them or with each other, through the music that I've shared? Um, and if I can check that box off as a yes, then nothing else really matters as much to me. So that's definitely the most rewarding. The most challenging, I think working through burnout is really hard. The pressure of deadlines is challenging. The expectations, once you've found some success as an artist, there are expectations for you to maintain something, whether it's always to sound the same or to create music that has the same kind of impact as what you've already made. Or like my most popular piece is called Chasing Sunlight. And pretty much every commission that I get, or that I got after that piece came out was, "We love Chasing Sunlight. Can you write us a piece just like that?" And I'm like, not really, because I already made that.
Yeah.
And I know what they mean is that they want something in that style, or these are the things that we like about your work. Can you make something else that's kind of like that? But I find it challenging to strike the balance between coming up with new, fresh, engaging, exciting material and staying true to my own voice while pleasing the people that are paying me to make the music. Like it is always a challenge, I think, to balance all of those elements.
Yeah, for sure. That's a lot to have to consider. um, Chris also asked, how has nature and being a forest therapy guide influenced your music and vice versa?
Yeah. Aside from the obvious, like a lot of my music is inspired by nature. I think that being a forest therapy guide and leaning more into that practice personally has helped me refine my creative process a little bit. Because I mentioned, going for long walks to come up with ideas and things like that. But now that I actually have a forest therapy practice, there's sort of a flow that I can take myself through in a little bit more of a formal way. Whereas before I'd be like, I'm just going to power walk it out and figure it out. And I think that tapping into the mindfulness aspect of nature connection has definitely helped with my mental health, and having a little bit more stability mental health wise helps me be a little bit more present and focused in my composing. And it's subtle, right? Like it's not like, oh, drastically all of a sudden everything's different. But I think that maintaining a mindfulness practice has just allowed for a little bit more space mentally, and even amidst really hard burnout and stuff, I'm able to make space for ideas because of this, yeah, because of that nature practice, I guess. And on a more like literal level, we live in an area where there's a lot of migratory birds passing through. I have definitely come up with melodies and rhythmic concepts from birds.
Wow.
And I have watched swarms of birds move through the sky, and I have created a melodic contour that follows that. And I've gotten to know the habits of the different birds that visit our feeders in the backyard and that build nests in our trees and stuff like that. And like that's such a special relationship to have with the land and with the others that share it, like so there are endless ways that my relationship with nature overlaps with my relationship with music. And I don't think that I would exist as a musician the way I do if I wasn't as connected with nature as I am. Like I think that they just are the same thing in a sense. And being a forest therapy guide is just a new way to encourage people to connect with nature, just as writing music about nature is a way to encourage people to connect with it, right? So it's just like using a different platform almost to achieve a similar goal.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, definitely. Fong asked, looking back at what you've done so far, what piece of work are you most proud of and why?
That's a great question and a really hard question.
Yeah. That's what everybody says about Fong's questions, by the way.
Well, that's good. They're making us think. Okay, maybe I'll give a couple of examples. So I have a piece called Tundra. It was originally written for euphonium and piano, but I've adapted it for a few other instruments, and I'm adapting it for full band as well. But this piece was written about my experience of living with depression, and the relationship between the solo instrument and the piano is meant to kind of represent the relationship between a person with depression and a support system, whether that's another person, a group of people, a community, whatever applies to the people playing it, hopefully. And that was just a very, very challenging project for me to take on. The person that commissioned it was creating a recital of all music about mental health. And most of the pieces existed already, but they wanted something new that was written just for them. And knowing that I was writing something for somebody who had that same lived experience, it put a lot of pressure on me to accurately and sensitively represent the experience of living with depression. And it was also just very personal and vulnerable for me to express that side of myself through my work. So I feel proud of myself for doing that. There were many moments in that process that I wanted to give up and be like, I'm sorry, I can't do it. It's too hard. But I did it. And so I wouldn't say that that's my favorite piece of music that I've ever created, but it's definitely an example of being really proud of my work because it was just something a little different. It was not a nature inspired. Well, it ended up being because tundra is an area where it's permanently frozen and there's not a lot of growth happening there. And the things that do grow and the animals that do live there and the people that do live in those environments have to work incredibly hard to exist in a way that is comfortable, that is meaningful, that is healthy and safe. And I drew that metaphor, the tundra environment as a metaphor for living with depression and how sometimes there's just nothing there. And to create something from nothing or to still thrive in a frozen ecosystem, that's what it feels like a lot of the time, to move through life with this kind of mental illness that is always there. So yeah, I'm careful to answer the question, not like a favorite piece of mine, but what I'm most proud of. And that's definitely one of them. But I'm proud of everything. I think every piece has a meaningful backstory, and just showing up as a woman of color anywhere in spaces where that's not the norm is kind of an act of resistance in a way, like just taking up space at all. So I think I'm proud of myself for doing that, even when it's been difficult.
Yeah, that's a good answer.
Thanks.
Before we wrap up, I wanted to touch on your podcast because you have a podcast.
I do. Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. Thanks for asking. So, my friend Dylan Maddox and I co host a podcast called the Band Room Podcast. And we speak with music educators, conductors, composers, performers, lots of people that are connected to, I guess, the music education world. Most of the time, it's band, like concert band oriented people,
Mhm.
but we speak to a variety of guests who do a lot of different things. And it's truly a highlight of any week or month that I get to record episodes. It's so inspiring to hear the stories of other artists and educators. I'm sure you can relate. That's,
Yep.
you know, part of the goal of creating a podcast like ours and like yours is to be able to share those stories with whoever will listen. But I think there's also a little bit of selfishness in there too. Like we get to talk to people that we're inspired by. We get to talk to people and have really, really interesting conversations.
Mhm.
So it's a very fulfilling thing to do. So Dylan and I are both Canadian, and we have some sponsorships from Canadian music organizations. So we try to feature Canadian musicians and music educators as much as we can. But we talk to people from all over the world and try to showcase the lives of people working in band and music ed in a variety of ways. So yeah, it's really fun.
Yeah. Cool. Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, so yeah, where can people find you on the internet?
So you can find my website, which is caitnishimura.com, and that's all my concert music. To order copies of scores and listen to reference recordings and read program notes and all of that. And on social media, I am at Composer Cait, and you can find me on Instagram and well, all the places, but I would say I'm most active on Instagram. I also have an Instagram page for my forest therapy stuff, and that is Forest Guide Cait. And Cait is spelled Cait, a little unconventional. So yeah,
Awesome. And I will link everything, including your podcast and everything,
thank you.
where the links are.
Amazing. Thank
All
you.
right, awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on. This is a really nice conversation. It was really great to get to know you better. And yeah, you're making an impact in this space. It's really cool to see.
Thank you so much for inviting me, and I enjoyed this conversation too. And I love seeing what you're doing with music online and everything. So let's keep in touch.
Thank you.